This is Kim from Adoption Matters with my co-hosts Sharon and Sally. Today we're going to share clips from former podcast guests and then share our trispective thoughts on adoption today.
I was adopted as an infant 79 years ago in the dark ages of adoption. And I found my birth family when I was in my early 20s. And I have a wonderful birth family and a wonderful adoptive family. I feel very blessed. I knew that in the 50s and 60s, people were not paying any attention, not even bad attention, to what was going on in the world of adoption. So I made it my business to make it my work. I was adopted as an infant 79 years ago in the dark ages of adoption. And I found my birth family when I was in my early 20s. And I have a wonderful birth family and a wonderful adoptive family. I feel very blessed. I knew that in the 50s and 60s, people were not paying any attention, not even bad attention, to what was going on in the world of adoption. So I made it my business to make it my work. I was adopted as a
Boy, as a birth mom, it really resonated with me listening to Dr. Joyce talk about adoption in the dark ages.
Yeah, as an adoptive parent too, just that word and how far we probably have come, but how far we have to go yet.
I know that's true, Sally, because I think where would we be without our groundbreakers, though? There was a platform to begin on. I feel we would be stuck in the dark ages, don't you? Without pioneers, where would we start from? Anyway, now let's hear more from Joyce.
So, like what you brought up, I mean, I'm an in-race adoptee. I was adopted right after World War II when there were way too many babies. So they could match you perfectly, same ethnicity, same religion, really match you very closely. And even in that situation, you knew that you were different.
Yes.
And it was evident, even if you could pass, you no one would have asked if I was adopted. They would have just assumed I belonged with my adoptive family. And I did, but I didn't. There's a
Yes.
way that you belong and there's a way that you don't belong.
Wow, feeling differently resonated with me so deeply as a birth mom. Uh, there's a way that you feel you belong and a way that you don't belong was a statement that she made that really, really hit me. After I gave birth and placed my son for adoption, I came back into society. Like I can't really think about a better way to terminology for that. Just this coming back in, carrying this profound secret. Here I was still a teenager, yet I was a mother. There was no way to process whatsoever my thoughts and feelings. There was no support, no acknowledgement of the ambiguous loss that I was experiencing. And I lived with these, contradictory thoughts. I'm a mother, but I'm not a mother. I'd see an infant and I would wonder, is that my child? Is that what they look like now? The secrecy definitely didn't protect me. It isolated me. It left me alone with a loss that really had no space, no name, no ritual, no allowance, for me to grieve. And I think for me, the dark ages weren't just about a lack of information, but also they were an enforced silence that made healing nearly impossible, during that time. Sally, how did it resonate with you as an adoptive parent?
Yeah, well, first, Kim, thanks for sharing that. That really is helpful just to me. Um, yeah, when I was listening to her, the question that popped up into my head was, what was this extreme effort to make it as similar as possible to have the families, the children and the families match as much as possible? Like, is that and was that for the child, or is it more for adoptive parents so that there, like you mentioned, the secrecy, especially back then, so that there aren't as many questions about this. Maybe there was some shame around why that couple was unable to have children, birth children. Um, and then I thought about, like, even now, that idea that we could somehow make it as similar as possible, and even with the idea for our kids that by having it be more similar, it will be easier for them. And that's the second part that popped up for me is she said, even with all that similarity, she still felt and knew that she fit and she didn't fit. And that's a reality check for our adoptive parents. And it's a good thing for them to know that there is an element to this, which is where there will be that fit, not fit. It doesn't matter how close you can get. And to be attentive to that for our kids would be really important for people to hear. Yeah, Sharon, what do you think as an adopted person?
Well, I'm just thinking about my history and basically being born and adopted in the dark ages when actually people of color really didn't adopt as much. But I was adopted into a domestic adoption with same race parents. And I think there was an effort by the social worker and the system to make sure that the child matched the family. Um, However, the dynamic of being adopted into a same race family didn't change my perspective as an individual adopted person. I still had a sense of not belonging, of not being understood, because there's not just the outward expression, there's an internal expression that happens with the child as well. So I felt like I was misplaced in a place where no one understood how I felt or what I thought. And it just was, it just felt wrong. And I also feel like looking back at this, that the adopted parents were given all the authority. There was a dynamic really where, what they said impacted the lives of the child more than how the child might feel, so it was difficult. Um, when I consider now what could have potentially happened to me had I not been adopted, I know it was probably better for me, but at the same time, it just fell off and the dynamic wasn't quite right. So, this whole thing makes me think and wonder what April, who's going to talk about the child's perspective, might have to say as well.
Sharon, I have to hold space with you a little bit because I want to tell little Sharon and little April that like we were supposed to just be growing and learning and doing things. Those added layers of complexity were above our pay grade at that time. We weren't meant to be able to know how to process any of that. Like, it wasn't like we weren't letting ourselves do it. We didn't know how, and no one was helping us. So it's a little bit of a different framing. I don't know if people listening would appreciate that. I appreciate saying out loud for myself because there's often so much that I put on. Well, I didn't do this and I wasn't able to do that. And at the end of the day, it's like I realize very clearly now that it had nothing to do with my developing brain not being able to do things. It had everything to do with people around me not seeing, not having clarity around the things that needed to happen in order to just allow me to develop in the 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 process of just being a kid and a human. But on top of all that, there was so much more that needed to happen. And
April's words hit hard for me because I too feel like I lost some of my childhood in a different way. I was 15. I was a child myself. I was pregnant, having to make adult decisions. And I carried the shame of being unwed, of being, that girl who was incapable of raising a child. And there was no one there to help me. Like my mom didn't even know how to be a mom to me in that. Uh, no one was really there to help me through those thoughts and the complexities or tell me it was okay even to be scared or confused or even okay to be heartbroken. Like April, I'm doing the work today to go back and hold space for that inner child, that 15-year-old little Kim who needs someone there to tell her that she mattered and that her feelings were valid and that she didn't have to carry that shame herself and that it wasn't even hers to fully bear. And I try to help other birth moms process that too. As an adult today, looking through a fully formed lens, I can finally offer that younger version of myself the compassion that she desperately needed then. Sally, what reflections do you have from an adoptive parent perspective?
Yeah. Well, the word expectations jumped out at me. Like, as an adoptive parents, what kind of expectations do we have for our kids? And I think sometimes we bring expectations that our family will be just like families born in, birth families, all birthed into that family, where there are these sort of unwritten expectations that kids will be able to develop just fine, and that we don't have to say everything. We don't need to like be as intentional, like our words, growing intentional families together. We don't have to be as intentional. We can just move along. But what she said was, um, she had to deal with more things. Just not. It wasn't just a childhood of playing and growing and having your usual challenges, and she couldn't expect herself. And how do we expect our kids to have the tools to navigate this extra layer of life? And that's where I wrote down the word tools. You know, we don't give our kids often the tools to be able to navigate a world in which we are not living. So it's really being attuned to the fact that for adoptive parents that we have children who have added layers, and we need to bring in the tools that we can to be able to help them navigate so they can grow up, um, a little more of not having all that responsibility on themselves when their brains haven't even developed yet.
It's interesting, Sally, because as April mentioned in her context, it basically, we have no words in our position. We're muted. And basically, our voice is not heard necessarily not because our parents don't want to hear us. It's because they don't have the tools, like you said, to hear us. And so I felt like I could stand at the top of a mountaintop and scream, and no one would hear me. And I just keep recalling, thoughts like, why did my birth mother leave me here? I had those kinds of thoughts all the time, looking for her in the grocery store or at the school playground. I thought maybe there's someone here that knows my mother. And so there was an internal question that I had all the time, and I kept it internal. I didn't share it. So I had the job of guarding my parents from how I really felt because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. So adoptees are sitting in a position where they're asked to carry more responsibility than they should have to carry as a child. So that's my perspective. And I hope that other adoptees can hear that and know that it was a position and a dynamic where they were asked to guide everyone else with clarity and precision as a child. And so that wasn't really fair. And I hope that they know that it wasn't fair for them to be called into that responsibility. But let's continue with Sharon McNamara. I want to hear what she has to talk about her experience. Say about her experience, I should say.
My parents did not know that they should have been more thoughtful about how they parented adopted kids. So they would say things like to non-adopted kids, if you said something like, "Well, we need to leave the park, otherwise we're going to have to leave you behind," that wouldn't have been. It would have been like, "Oh, I know they're not going to really leave me behind. There wouldn't have been that." But I didn't. And so me and my brother and sister were like, hop to, you better run because oh my gosh, they might leave us behind." So
Right.
that feeling of how you belonged was I was quite sensitive to any being different or being bad or not, so
Listening to Sharon talk about these seemingly innocent but deeply wounding statements, for me as a birth mom, it identified this underlying fear of loss that seems to be an invisible thread that has run throughout my entire life. Sometimes it shows up in my fear of being close to people because they might not be there. Even today, some of these lingering thoughts show up when I leave the house and I like obsessively worry, did I leave the curling iron on? Or did I leave the stove on? And I envision like the house burning down and my pet dying and all this catastrophic loss. I never really associated that until I was an adult, that, deep fear to having, gone through the adoption experience. And it definitely showed up in the way I parented future children. I hear that today in a lot of my birth moms, that vigilance, that hypervigilance, and that fear that somehow you're going to lose someone else next. And I believe that is sort of like this legacy of loss in adoption. It not only affects the adoptee who is separated from their first family, it affects the birth mom who carries that separation, that severing deep in her nervous system. And that fear of loss and that nervous system dysregulation becomes part of how we move through the world. And I think that it can be really easy to, not realize where it's stemming from. Sally, how did you see this playing out, in the perspective of an adoptive parent?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking to myself, if we only look at this adoption experience through our own lens, we can miss out on a lot. For instance, when you bring up the loss in adoption, for adoptive parents, for many of us, it looks like all gain. We have a child, we have children. Um, and so if we're not ready to attune to and stand alongside and look at the world through our kids' lenses, then these kinds of phrases will come out because we're not aware of what they might be going through. And it really is important to stop and say, what might this experience be for our kids? And the more we tune into it, the more we realize and don't minimize the loss and the trauma that occurs. When we don't minimize it, then these statements might not even come out as much. We might be like, that's probably not the thing to say here. And even some parenting techniques we might start to really wonder about, like timeouts, which can is all about separation.
Yeah.
Things like that can really cause a lot of damage. But in order for us to make those changes, we need to take seriously the the depth of the experience for our children and be open also to hearing from them about it. I won't go into it exactly, but I just the other day had an experience of starting to think about it from just my point of view, but a decision that my husband and I were making. And then we wound up in a different place after we um, thought more about what this might be like from our kids' point of view. So, how about you, Sharon?
Wow. Well, that's pretty deep. It takes a lot of courage, I think, on the part of adoptive parents sometimes to see beyond themselves. And I appreciate what you were saying, Sally. But as I was thinking about this, I thought about our one of our attunement principles, which is encourage playfulness and good humor as a family value. And I thought, what a playful thing they were doing when they were talking about being left in the park. And because we had something similar. One of our standing jokes was, oh, you know, our you were found at the front of the door in a basket because it was on cartoons all the time. And we saw this portrayed on television about this basket where somebody was left and everything. And so all of us kids would laugh about it, together and just make it a big joke. But, now in retrospect, it really wasn't a laughing matter, and if we were looking at a family value, I think from my perspective now as a parent, I would expect to say, oh, I don't think that that's how we would think of you. You know, in our conversations, we explain the truth. Like, you know, we really love you, and this is how we came to find you or be with you. If it, you know, if it's a situation where the child was adopted, no matter what, you could explain to them, you know, again, you know, what that process was. And then we would say to them something about how much we care for them and let them know that they're accepted in our midst. And our family value is really to reframe that whole position and talk about joy of having them in here in our family and being with us. And so, you know, that's what I thought about. You know, when I heard Sharon say that left in the park thing, I said, okay, left in the park, left in the basket. You know, which one do you want to have? You know, so sometimes these playful things that initially sound that way can be the building blocks for a lack of confidence in your child. So just, I think it's a height of awareness to really be able to be attuned to what that can bring about and how to manage it.
Well, we hope these reflections have deepened your understanding of how adoption impacts every member of the constellation in profound and interconnected ways. So we hope that you'll join us again as we talk more about real people, real life, real matters in our trispective adoptive centric approach.